Hey everybody, Mr. Drummond here, coming to you from my kitchen. Today is March 25th, it's Wednesday. So wanted to drop you guys a quick line, go over a couple things with you to try to help you out with the assignments that you were given, kind of talk through some stuff. I'll keep doing these throughout the whole shutdown, however long that goes. Hope everyone's staying safe, doing the whole social distancing thing, right? Staying to yourself. If everybody does what we're supposed to, we'll just get through this and hopefully be back together. But we got to take care of each other. So hopefully everyone's safe, everyone's family's doing good. But what I wanted to talk about today was the portion of your assignment after Amendments 11 through 27 about the state of Ohio, okay? And we've talked a lot this year about this idea of federalism, okay? And federalism is the idea that we share power, right, between a federal government, the United States government with the president and the United States Congress and the federal courts, right, the national government, the federal government, and 50 separate state governments. Okay, Ohio has its own state government. Massachusetts has its own. New York has its own. Arkansas has its own. We've talked about that. We're going to talk a little bit more about Ohio's government, right? The government that just makes and enforces and interprets laws for citizens of the state of Ohio or people in the state of Ohio, okay? So what I want to do is I want to go over the notes that you found. They're about the state of Ohio. Okay, they're those guided notes. I filled them in for you. I just wanted to kind of quickly go over them with you so that I could give a little bit of context and help you kind of decode what they mean. Okay, so everything we talk about today is going to be about Ohio's Constitution, right? We've studied a lot about the United States Constitution. And remember, Constitution means rule book for how a government operates, right? What's it allowed to do? What is it not allowed to do? What are the rights of citizens? Okay, it's the rule book, okay? Ohio's got its own rule book. The United States government has the U.S. Constitution, which are the rules that the federal government has to follow. Ohio has its own constitution. And just like the federal government, right? The federal government, if you remember way at the beginning of the year, we talked about something called the Articles of Confederation, right? Which were problematic. They didn't work great. So we had to come up with the Constitution. Ohio had a similar problem. We've got two constitutions, or we have a constitution and then we rewrote the Constitution, right? We did it twice in the state of Ohio. We had one from 1803, okay? Good start, lots of problems. We started again. We tried another version in 1851. We made all kinds of changes to fix three big problems that we're going to talk about. So there's two tries at a constitution in Ohio. We've got the 1803 Constitution and we've got the 1851 Constitution, okay? So let's get started. I'll just kind of go through, and if you want to follow along with me, there are those notes. They look like that, okay? They got the state flag of Ohio, okay? And it says Problems and Solutions, Ohio's 1803 and 1851 Constitution, okay? So the first thing that we need to talk about, okay, is Ohio's start. We didn't start, we're not one of the 13 original colonies. Ohio's actually the 17th state admitted to the Union, all right? We were admitted in 1803, okay? And before we were a state, we were what we call a territory, right? We were an area the federal government controlled, but we weren't a state yet, okay? We were part of what was called the Northwest Territory, okay? This is not a history class, so we're not going to go into a ton about it, but there are three big important things that were kind of like, whoa, these are interesting ideas. The Northwest Territory, or the Northwest Ordinance, was the first time anywhere in the United States a law was written down by the federal government that said no slavery, Okay, that was a big deal. Second thing that it did is that it set up the process for how a state becomes a state, right? We knew that this Northwest Territory, the more people moved there, right, they would eventually become states. So the Northwest Territory shows us that process. And then the last thing is it had a Bill of Rights in it, which this was before the Constitution was written even. It was the first time we wrote down a Bill of Rights. So a couple of important things there, okay? In 1803's Constitution, we've got a few big problems, okay? The first thing is that the legislative branch, Ohio's legislative branch, is way more powerful than any other branch, okay? It is super, super powerful, right? We talk about, we want 3 equal branches of government. In the 1803 Constitution, the legislative branch was the biggest, most powerful branch, and the other 2 were not nearly powerful enough. And that's going to create a problem, right, with checks and balances, okay? Checks and balances means what? Each branch of government is supposed to be equal, and they're supposed to be able to check, keep the other 2 branches in line. If this legislative branch is huge and the other 2 branches are tiny, they won't be able to check the legislative branch. Why was the legislative branch so powerful? How do we know that? Well, they appointed everybody else. The legislative branch appointed executive branch officials and judicial branch officials. The people didn't pick them. The executive branch didn't pick them. The legislature hired the other 2 branches, right? So they are the boss, essentially. If you want a job in the executive or the judicial branch, you better not make the legislative branch angry, okay? The governor, who is the head, we talk about the president's the head of the executive branch at the federal level. The governor had very little power, okay? And we'll talk more about why that was in a moment, okay? And the courts, okay, the judicial branch, were not elected by the people. They were appointed by the legislature, okay? And an interesting thing about them is they had to meet in every county. The Supreme Court had to meet in every county. Ohio's got 88 counties. Ohio's a pretty big state. The Supreme Court had to travel around to every single county to hear appeals, okay? We're going to see how that becomes a problem, okay? The last problem is that the state has a huge amount of debt, right? When we talk about debt is money that you owe people, okay? Governments spend money. That's okay, all right? Governments pay bills, that's okay to have some debt, but the state of Ohio had an enormous, unmanageable amount of debt, okay? Started to hurt the economy. Part of that was because the legislature was abusing their power to spend money, okay? And we'll talk about that in a moment, okay? So if you look to that last page, okay, it looks like this, okay? So let me get this flipped around the right way. All right, where it says the 3 main problems with Ohio's Constitution. All right, it's the little web chart, okay? 3 main problems. 1, the legislative branch has way too much power. 2, there's a backlog in court cases. People can't get to the courts because there's only a Supreme Court and the Court of Common Pleas, right? So anytime anybody wants to appeal, it has to go to the Supreme Court. There is nothing in between, okay? That's going to create a problem. The Supreme Court has to travel all the way around the country and the state. And remember, it's 1803, 1804, 1805. We're not taking cars, right? These judges are going to be on horses and carriages going around the state of Ohio. You might have a court case and you have to wait forever and a day to get an appeal. Okay, so legislative branch is too powerful, no checks and balances. The courts are inefficient. The courts aren't working correctly. There's not enough courts. And 3, debt. Way too much money being spent by the federal or by the state government, okay? And a lot of times it was done in kind of a corrupt way, right? I'm in the state legislature. I got a buddy who wants to build a railroad. so I'm going to help him out by giving him a bunch of state money and saying it's for the good of the state, but really I'm just helping out my buddy, okay? So this 1803 Constitution's got all these problems. The 1851 Constitution is going to try to fix them, right? So if you go back up to the notes where it says Roman numeral 3, okay? Ohio's Constitution, 1851, okay? What did it do? Well, the first thing it's got to do is it's got to make the legislature less powerful, okay? So what's it going to do? Okay, it's going to say, first of all, you don't get to appoint judges and executive branch officials, right? The people are going to pick those. So we're going to take power from the legislature and we're going to give it to the people of the state of Ohio, okay? Second thing it does, okay, it's going to make sure that the laws are going to apply equally to everybody, right? We talk about that equal protection. Under the 1803 Constitution, a lot of times the state legislature, the General Assembly, would make laws that just applied to a specific group of people, okay? Or were retroactive. We're going to say you can't do that anymore, right? You make a law, it only can go into effect the day the law is made going forward. You can't punish people for things that happened earlier when it wasn't against the law to do that. That's called a retroactive law, okay? The legislature can make laws, they can make things illegal, but they can't punish people for things they did before it was illegal. So, for example, if they made a law that said it was illegal to, I don't know, engage in a particular profession, okay? They couldn't punish people who did that profession before it was illegal because it wasn't illegal yet, all right? So no retroactive laws. Everybody has to follow the same rules, okay? We're going to fix the judicial branch, right? So instead of just having a Supreme Court and then the lowest courts, which in Ohio are called courts of common plea, we're going to have put in a new level of the court system, okay? So we're going to go from just a state Supreme Court and courts of common pleas, and we're going to insert this district court of appeals, right? So now people have a place to go rather than the Supreme Court if they've got a problem, okay? They don't have to go straight to the Supreme Court, okay? If you think about it at our school, okay? Not every single problem that a student has goes right to Mr. Batchelor, right? Mr. Batchelor has Mrs. Huff, Mrs. Campbell as assistant principals. We've got deans, right? Mr. Loudon, Ms. Zordich. We've got guidance counselors, okay? Not every issue that a student has, we've got teachers, not every issue is going to go straight to Mr. Batchelor. Imagine how long it would take Mr. Batchelor if he had to solve every single issue in the school. He couldn't do it by himself. It would take forever. So that's why there's people below him, between students and the principal, to try to solve those problems before they get to Mr. Batchelor, right? Imagine if Mr. Batchelor had to go to every classroom every day, okay, and deal with every issue that came up in a classroom, okay? He'd never get anything done, all right? So we've got levels between the principal and students. We've got levels between the Supreme Court in Ohio and the trial courts, right? These appeals courts are inserted. So that way you can get some stuff taken care of before it has to go to the Supreme Court, okay? The Supreme Court no longer has to meet in every county anymore, so the Supreme Court can stay centrally located and people can come to it. That makes things go faster, okay? And then finally, we're going to control the debt, okay? The state of Ohio is spending way too much money. What's the way to make sure the government doesn't get into too much debt? Set a limit, right? The state legislature cannot pay or cannot spend more than it has. They have a limit of $750,000. That's how much debt they can go into, okay? Which, when we're talking about a whole state government, that's not very much money, right? That's less than $1 million, okay? State budgets are tens of millions of dollars, so hundreds of millions of dollars. So 750,000 pretty much means the budget has to be what we would call balanced, right? The amount that we spend can't be more than what we take in, right? Or it can't be more than $750,000 more. So the budget pretty much has to be balanced. That's going to keep us from getting into too much debt. There's some complicated economic reasons why public debt for a state is bad, right? The state of Ohio can't print its own money like the federal government can, so we don't want to go into too much debt. That could hurt businesses, that could hurt interest rates. We'll talk about that a little bit later, okay? But the key takeaway from today's little video, okay? 2 constitutions, right? First try at a constitution in 1803 in Ohio, second try in 1851. 3 problems with the first constitution. The legislature had too much power, okay? The executive or the judicial branch was too slow, right? There was a backlog of court cases, and the state had too much debt, okay? We're going to fix these 3 problems by saying, first of all, the legislative branch is less powerful. We're going to take away the power to appoint executive branch officials. We're going to add a couple of executive branch positions, okay? We're going to make the judicial branch more powerful. We're going to give power to the people to elect those officials in the executive and the judicial branch. Secondly, we're going to add an appeals court to the state of Ohio, okay? So that way we don't have to take every appeal straight to the Supreme Court. And third, okay, third change in the 1851 Constitution is we're going to limit the amount of debt Ohio can go into. $750,000 is the limit on debt, which is a pretty thin margin, right? Pretty much means the budget has to be balanced, okay? So that's the notes, okay? If you want to watch this video, have it on while you do the activity related to the notes, email me questions, okay? You know, I haven't heard from a lot of people, so just make sure that you're still keeping those lines of communication open, all right? And stay safe, okay? I'll check in with you guys again real soon. If you want to do, if you have access to a computer with a camera, we could do like a video conference through this thing called Zoom, which we can get set up. Okay, I'll put instructions on Google Classroom if we want to do that. All right, but just hang in there. Let me know if you got any questions about it. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon, okay? Take care.